Monsieur Anber.
Monsieur Cassavant, back home.
Back home in the basement where you've been spending most of your time since the pandemic, as the quarantine rules in Canada, of course, still in place, the 14-day quarantine, but back from a busy weekend of fights in England. We'll get to all of that tonight. We're going to get to, of course, some other topics with the Canelo fight against Billy Joe Saunders in front of thousands upon thousands of fans in Texas Stadium this upcoming Saturday. We have a good question from our an audience member here who tweeted us, Ron Evans, about pound for pound list. We have ring issues. We have a Mayweather, Jake Paul, Logan Paul circus this week. Press conference issues. Look, there's a lot to get to, but how are you doing, Mr. Anber, now that you're back into your home here in Laval?
Not only am I back home, but when I was there, two people went out of their way to make sure that I had tea to come back home to Canada with. So two of my English friends made sure that they gave me a box of tea to come back with, of which I'm enjoying one right now. And
of
course,
best tea, so it's better tea than regular North American tea, is what you're saying.
As store shelf tea goes, yes, it is. It's you can even tell by the size of the bag is bigger, and there's more tea in a British tea bag than in a Canadian from the supermarket, that is. But anyways, it's great. But just the fact that these two guys, one of them is an inspector for the British Boxing Board of Control. The other is a police officer, and he works with the British Boxing Board of Control as the timekeeper, and rings the bell. And they all made sure, Russ, you're going to be there. We have tea, and they brought me tea.
Wait, do you still have friends with the British Board of Boxing after the comments with the Oscar Rivas fight, after Dillian White, after Malik Scott's stoppage years ago? You still have some friends with the British Board of Boxing?
Of course, because when you're right, you're right. And it's not like I attack anybody in particular, but when you do something wrong, you do something wrong. But in general, like with Robin Smith, who's the head of British Boxing Board of Control, I've never had any issues with him. Most of the inspectors I haven't. It's sometimes some of the people who represent the board, in different areas of the country, that you've never seen before, suddenly they try to impose themselves on you. That's where we had that problem in the fight with Rivas. But generally, I haven't had a problem with anybody from the British Boxing Board of Control. So, and yeah, I do have some friends there, and they made sure I had my tea, and they had it. One of them had it delivered to the hotel for me, so that was really nice. Now I'm back here. This is the part, this is one thing I wanted to tell you, and I guess we'll get this out of the way, and it's just insanity personified. And Matthew, I've been doing the best I can to adhere to the rules and regulations and the safety of everybody I could, and following the guidelines, of quarantining and whatnot, since we started traveling again last August, at the end of last August. And on this particular trip, I was tested 4 times in 8 days. 4 times in 8 days. I came out of a secure bubble, okay? I came in on a flight that's basically empty, right? Like there's nobody on the planes, as you well know. Took another test when I got here to Montreal, got the negative result while I stayed as per government orders in the government hotel, and still have to quarantine. I'm a healthy, negative
and
guy.
You've been vaccinated.
And vaccinated. I forgot about that. Vaccinated as well. How does this make any sense? I mean, I thought Canada, we kind of do things good, and we're the envy of the world sometimes, we do things right. Brother, I fail to see the logic and understanding behind this. I just don't get it.
Well, we're not going to get too political tonight, but if you were a hockey player, you would have had a 7-day quarantine. So I guess boxing gets no love once again.
Right. Like, how does that make sense? This is the part I don't get.
The argument is that hockey players only travel from the States, and boxers can be international travel. So apparently they're stricter because you come from.
Well, if you're using that logic, how is it that we have no sports here, and Texas and Florida doesn't even think there's COVID anymore? Like, as far as they're concerned, it doesn't even exist. There's going to be 70,000 people at the stadium on Saturday, 0 of them wearing masks, except maybe the athletic commission people. That's it. I don't get it. We're on the same planet. We're in the same proximity of each other. They think nothing's going on. We're in a pandemic mode. I don't get it.
Well, look, we'll see what happens in the coming weeks. I don't know. I don't even know where to go. I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert in any of this, but I am glad that you are here, and I'm glad there's going to be fans in the stands for some of these events. And Texas and Florida are getting all the events in the near catalog future, it looks like, because there's no restrictions on audiences in those destinations. We'll get the Canelo and Saunders because there's a lot too. But because you were in England and you were in Manchester on Saturday, in London on Friday for Mick Conlan, Saturday for Chisora. Now, I want to get to Chisora first because a lot of people were waiting for your take after the decision for Dereck Chisora, who you were working cuts for. And did you wrap his hands as well, or just cuts?
Of course. Of course, I wrapped his hands. Yeah.
Perfect. So first time with Dereck Chisora, who he had just been in the opposite corner of with Usyk, and had, of course, relationship with after a little. But then you get there Saturday, and Buddy McGirt is with Dereck Chisora for the first time in his corner. You had veteran knowledge. Dereck Chisora comes out, as he does often, dominates the few rounds. He hurts Joseph Parker, and it looks like he's going to win. Then in the second half of the fight, some rounds Parker does well, boxes well, but close rounds, and Chisora loses another razor-thin decision, which seems to be kind of what happens with him in a lot of these fights in his career. So now a lot of people are wondering. Some people thought that the scorecard were unfair. Some thought they were fair. Your take on the situation from this past Saturday?
Look, it was a close fight. There's no doubt about it. It was a close fight. It wasn't a case where one guy, or actually I should say where Chisora won, 7 of the 12 rounds handily. That didn't happen. It was a close fight. Thinking back on it, I thought that we should have at worst, got a draw. At best, the win. I didn't feel Parker did enough to carry the day and say, I won the fight. He was backpedaling. He was holding. He was taking some hellacious body punches, which, again, comes back to what I've said to you before. Sometimes, most of the time, judges don't know what they're looking for. They don't see some of those investment shots, which are just as scoring as a jab or a head blow or whatever. Body shots are an integral and important part of boxing. And we made sure Buddy was making sure that he kept Chisora on that body. We kept saying, dig the body, get inside, dig the body, don't pull out, dig, stay inside, dig. And every time he would hold. It's hard to see that you could win that many rounds by doing what he did. So what I will tell you as it happened factually, in the corner in the 11th round, I turned to Buddy and I said, Buddy, we're getting out hustled now. And he said, yeah. And we had lost a couple of those rounds, like 9 and 11 or 9 and 10 or 8 and 10. In the late rounds, we like Chisora took the round off and ended up losing the round. And I felt like the momentum was swinging away from us and that Parker was building some momentum. And Buddy told him when he got back to corner, he said, look, I'm not saying you need a knockout. He said, but you got to punch, you got to work and win this round. And he did. And I thought, like I said, I know they're always very difficult on Chisora for whatever reason. But I thought if we come out of this with a draw, this is great for him. He doesn't suffer a loss. He doesn't have 2 losses in a row. Good for him, but he could get the win here. And when they announced the first one a draw, I thought, oh, all right, that means we're going to get it. We're not going to get the draw. We're going to actually get the win. And they turned around and gave it and went the other way. And I was a little bit disappointed about that, to be honest with you, Matt. And
especially the 116, 111 scorecard, right? For
ridiculous number, right? Ridiculous. And as soon as that happened, Buddy's phone, my phone started exploding with, oh, you got robbed, you got beat, he won that fight. Wow, like I did. Sometimes you don't realize how it looks on TV, right? Because you're there and you're in the heat of the action. Parker's got some nice hands. When he does stuff nice, he's really good. Like, he's athletic, he's good, he throws good punches. And Chisora's just he wants to go to where he puts his whole heart on the line, in coming back and in fighting. So it was good. I was proud to be in that corner, and something happened at the end, which doesn't happen very often. But one of the guys that works with Chisora and has been with him a while, his name is Ruben. He was the guy that was in the ring. If you watched on TV, he was the guy on his knees in the ring between rounds, giving him water. while Buddy was giving instructions and I was tending to the Vaseline and all that stuff. And he came in the dressing room after the fight. Buddy and I were sat talking, and he came over and he said, "Gentlemen," he said, "I've been in boxing for 20 years." And I said, "Ah, yeah, baby." You know, he started laughing, right? So you're a baby. He says, "I've worked with George Groves. I've worked with Chisora. I've worked with other guys." He named some other guys that had fought. And he said, "I've never been involved in a more professional corner than you two guys." And I like, that's rare that someone comes and tells you that. And I felt so good when he said that, because every time I work with Buddy, it's like clockwork. We see the same fight. He doesn't let his ego get in the way. You know, I can talk freely to Buddy. I can yell instructions from the corner without worrying that Buddy's going to say something. It was just a pleasure to work with him. And that somebody like Ruben noticed was really nice. So I hope they'll have me back.
As far as Chisora, now he talked about having a rematch with Parker, and Parker seemed to be open. Kudos to him. And it just, the heavyweight division, I don't know if you agree, Russ, right now, it's probably the deepest it's been in pre-Klitschko days. But since Vladimir and Vitaly kind of took over, right now, when you look at the guys from 1 through 10 in the division, there's some interesting fights to be made. There's entertaining fights to be made, which was not always the case for several years after Lennox Lewis kind of passed the torch. I mean, if you look at Chisora, Parker, you had Andy Ruiz that evening. I don't know if you had a chance to see much of it.
I saw clips of that. Yep, I did. It
turned out to be a heck of a fight, and especially in the first 6 rounds, Ruiz then was able to, get more comfortable, win a comfortable decision. And really, there's a lot of interesting names in the heavyweight division. Do you think Chisora, Parker, if there was a rematch, you think Chisora at that age can change anything? Or is it one of those cases, again, where he has to hurt the guy early? If not, he loses steams as the rounds go ahead.
Matthew, I'm going to turn that back around and ask you the question. I'm going to answer that with a question. Now, I know they're not the same type of fighter, but the tactics were similar. Did you feel that Chisora was a better fighter in this fight than he was in the Usyk fight?
For the overall stage of the fight, absolutely. I think in the Usyk fight, Usyk was a bit bothered at first by the size, the power, and then he adjusted. But was never really, Chisora, I thought, put more pressure and more effective punching of landing shots on Parker than Usyk had. I thought Usyk was able to not, especially in the second half, was able to avoid a lot of the power shots that Chisora was still landing with Parker, and it was more of a back and forth affair than the Usyk one. So I think clearly at 37, Chisora is still capable of improving, or at least being, a guy who's relevant in the heavyweight division.
So my answer then, which I'm glad you said that, because I feel the same way. I think if Buddy has more time with him, he only had I think he said he had 6 weeks or 5 weeks with him that he was with him. I think with a little more time, I think you would see better results. And I would hope, that Buddy would ask me to join him, because we're a good tandem. We're a great tag team. I love the way we work, because we think about the same things. We see fights the same way. We teach the same kind of things, So I like working with Buddy, and I think that there was a difference in Chisora, and I think if Buddy had more time, there could be even more improvement in Chisora and more effectiveness. I mean, you're not going to change the guy's style now, but you're going to be able to implement or improve on what he does and make it better. So, I think, and he was receptive. That was one thing that I really liked. Like, he was really receptive when we were yelling things, he was doing them, which is great. Don't stand up. Oh, you get down low. There's different things he was doing, which were really effective. And when we told him to stay on his chest, he was doing that. He was responding. So I think if he had more time with Buddy, I think he could only get better.
Yeah, probably right. And there's a heck of a card in Manchester Saturday. It was like a loaded card. And you had Roy Jones, who somebody you've been, of course, as in the corner of when he's fighting, and now he's coaching. He had Brian Perella a few weeks ago. Now he was in the corner of Chris Eubank, somebody else who's Roy has only had a few fights, I think, or this might have even been his first with Eubank, and try to develop and try to bring it to the next level. How did it go when you saw Roy? And what do you think of his, right now, his dedication towards being a coach, more so even now than a fighter?
Matthew, I'll tell you what, it was so great getting to Manchester, getting to the arena that night. it took me 20 minutes to make the rounds of the dressing room to go and see everybody that I knew that was there. And Roy was one of them. Roy was the first room I went to because I knew he was going to be going out soon with Eubank. And as I tapped on the door and I just peeked my head in, Roy, hey, Ruski, what's happening? You know, and he grabbed me and hugged me and he introduced me to everybody in the room and he introduced me to Eubank. He said, this is the guy I was telling you about. This is the guy I was telling you about. You know, he wraps my hands, you know. And so Eubanks was in the zone a little bit, you know, so I just wished him luck. But I'm glad I got to see Roy. Then I went and saw Joe Gallagher in his room. He had Marcus, who was about to go in as well. Wished them luck. Got to see him. Got to see Anthony Crawlin, give him a hug. And with
Taylor, right?
I'm sorry?
You got a chance to see Katie Taylor?
And then after that room, went into Katie Taylor's room, got to see Katie, wished her luck, and then went back in the room and stayed with Chisora for the rest of the night. So it was really good catching up with everybody there. And it was a hell of a night in Manchester. I really enjoyed it. It was a good night. It was a lot of fun. And too bad we didn't have the crowds, but it was a great fight and great working with Buddy and seeing everybody. And I really enjoyed it. It was a great card. Like the Tasha Jonas, Katie Taylor fight.
Yeah. I was going to ask you.
Throw out the window that it's two girls fighting. That was a fight. I don't care if it was man or woman. That was a hell of a fight of high standard, good quality, good punching, good technique, good stance. Everything was right. Everything was the way boxing should be. And I really, really enjoyed it. They really fought their ass off.
And when I watched that fight, I was reminded of when we had Savannah Marshall on the program a few weeks ago, middleweight champion, and she was saying a rare opinion when it comes to the female professional fighting, that 2-minute rounds make it more entertaining. And I was watching that fight, I said, you know, maybe she has a point, because everybody's clamoring for 3-minute rounds to separate the levels. They think there's going to be a distinction in that 3-minute round, something you've said in the past as well. But Savannah Marshall's point was that the fights become more entertaining. So I came with that idea and I looked at it and said, maybe she's right. These fights are actually very entertaining and they go by quickly in 2 minutes. And also at the same time, I'm saying to myself, we're privileged right now that the women fighters are fighting the best. Because I think eventually it's going to be like the men. There's going to be more and more picking and choosing opponents. You won't have the top fighting the top as they are now. And I think clearly what we saw, Katie Taylor does not shy away from any opponent. And Jonas was a rematch of the Olympic stage from the 2012 Olympics, I believe. So I don't know, was that when you were looking at that fight, you said, man, we should have 3 minutes? Or do you say to yourself, you know what, maybe Savannah's right and it's more entertaining, the 2-minute round?
It crossed my mind. I won't lie. It crossed my mind. But I'm not sure I agree. And I'll tell you why. Because I think that in this case, and we've seen it with men, just because it's 3 minutes doesn't mean you're not going to get action.
That's right.
Okay, so I think that Natasha Jonas, I think, would have fought that way for 3 minutes around, and I think it would have been just as exciting. And if you want to use an example of a fight or a women's fight that may have happened that didn't have a lot of action or wasn't good or whatever, over 2 minutes, it would be the same over 3 minutes. It wouldn't be, I don't subscribe to the theory that, oh, it was really action-packed when it was 2 minutes, but if it was 3, it would have been boring. I don't believe that. I think you would still get the fighters who give you action-packed, the fighters who come to fight, the fighters who throw punches, just like the men. You have great fights at 3 minutes and you have stinkers at 3 minutes. It depends on the quality of the fighter, depends on the matchup of the styles as well. That's very, very important. So when you watch someone like Katie Taylor and Natasha Jonas, hats off to them. They earned 1 million% of my respect on how well they fought. And I'm not just saying it. It wasn't like the Shannon Courtney, Ebony Bridges fight. This was where that was an action-packed fight. They threw punches. But this was throwing punches at a next level. You know, this was like as good and as pound for pound as you could get in the quality of punches that were thrown.
I agree. And I'm not sure what's left really for Katie Taylor to prove in kind of building her legacy. There's not that many, I think, options for her really at the lightweight division that are going to be tougher outs than Natasha Jonas. Like, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe someone will emerge in the coming months. But at the moment, I think Katie Taylor clearly is continuing to cement herself as one of the best female fighters to have ever done it. but there's not too many challenges, I think, for her right now. But any fight she does take part in, is a good fight. It's entertaining action most of the time.
It is, and it's quality. And I'm just worried that these fights, like they take something out of you. They take something out of you, and then she could come up against somebody when all of a sudden she has no more to draw upon. That's what happens with age, with anybody, and
Yeah,
I don't
she's
want
not.
to see that happen to her.
Yeah, that's the thing. She's already, I believe, in her mid-30s, Katie Taylor. So a long
Yeah,
amateur career, extended amateur career. We'll see what the future
yeah.
holds. But clearly, and a role model, I believe, for female fighters by not only her style in the ring, but the way she handles herself outside the ring. Probably, she's
Both of them.
humble and
Both
classy.
Jonas as well. What's
Yeah,
that?
humble and classy. For Katie Taylor.
Absolutely. To me, that's why I love Savannah Marshall. That's why I love Katie. I love the way they carry themselves. Natasha Jonas carries herself with such class. All of them. To me, that's if you have hopes of growing the sport and getting it better, that's what you're gonna need. That's what I like. I mean, I could be biased, but I like that in men or women. That's always been
Yeah.
the preferred style. I was a big Andre Ward fan. I like when you carry yourself with that assuredness and you let your results do the talking. That's
Well,
what I think is the best.
fair enough, but you also appreciate the people who can back up the talking, because how many years did you work with Jean Pascal, who was a great talker outside the ring, but when it came to delivering action, he delivered on what he would say, and you respected
100%.
that as well from Jean.
100%. But I never considered Jean in any way. Like, I mean, you might correct me on this, but I don't remember him being cruel or lacking of respect. Where he really tried to belittle people, or I
No,
mean, he liked to do the talking. He loved the press conferences. He loved the interviews. But I don't remember him doing things that were below the belt, and we're seeing more and more of that emerging every day in the sport. So
no, 100%, 100%. Look, there's a lot of stuff that happened over the past weekend, but we got to get to some of the action upcoming. Just quickly, though, Mick Conlan on Friday in London. A lot of, Mick Conlan was somebody who, for the lower weight classes, draws a lot of attention, draws a lot of hype. Top Rank is behind him. He had, of course, the Olympic situation where he was robbed. We talked about that last week. Now he's in a position, he's trying to get that championship fight, ideally in Ireland. But the 122 debut maybe didn't go as smoothly as many thought. He won the fight, but he experiences challenges during the bout. So a lot of people are wondering, do you stay at 122? Do you go to 126? Or is it too early to tell after just one fight? You want to see more fights at 122 before making that determination?
that's funny you should say that, because I talked with Jamie today, his brother and manager, and we discussed this. And I talked with Mick yesterday, debriefed the fight a little bit on how he felt and everything. Listen, first of all, let's get one thing out of the way. He won that fight. That was an 8-4 fight. I don't think there's any that the fact that they called that fight close is insane. How do you call that fight that close? But they did. And the other guy, again, another case of judges not exactly seeing what they should know, what they're looking for. He fought a guy who made a lot of noise when he punched, and he had massive punch output. Like, he threw, and he barked with every punch.
Beluda, the opponent, yeah.
I'm sorry?
Beluda, the last name of the opponent.
Beluda, correct. Inoda Beluda. He threw, and he was aggressive. And there were times Conlan was backing him up and was on his chest. Conlan didn't have the output that he had, but his percentage of touching was superior. The punches he landed were far cleaner than the punches that the Beluda landed.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was the first fight at 22, and there were some questions that had to be answered. Some are not yet answered. So I think it's a little bit of, okay, let's reevaluate and go back and try this again. I think they felt comfortable enough of staying at 22. I think they felt good in making the weight. Through training, they were able to sustain the weight they wanted to stay at. So that's going to be for Mick to determine that. And I think, you had one fight, lay off, first fight at that weight class. You're not sure. I think you have to say that, okay, you got to do this again. There's still a few questions you want answered. You got to go through the 122-pound test again, I believe.
Yeah, and just to your point as well, by talking with Jamie, Mick Conlan, I don't know if you brought this up, but Mick Conlan in the post fight didn't seem to rush. He seems to be quite self-aware of his performance and wasn't rushing necessarily saying, "Let give me every champion right away." He said, got to get back to check on the tape, got to try and improve and try to get towards the path toward a title shot. But I think he understands himself that maybe there's things to correct in order for him to not only win a belt but be a champion for a while. Because it's one thing to win the belt, but to maintain it and stuff, you got to be ready. Really maybe a bit sometimes more practice and more patience that you might want to for the fans' perspective.
Yeah, I think so. I think he realized what he wanted to do and what, often a fighter will know what he wants to do and doesn't do. He knows, right? He knows. So I think there's things he wanted to do. And one of the things that he realized after the fight right away was that he was loading up with singles, a lot of singles, especially in the latter half of the fight. Because when he was putting his shots together and counter punching, he was very, very effective. When he was backing the guy up, using the jab, staying on him, it was very, very effective. The goodness that I'll take out of that fight is there's a lot of stuff that he showed. He showed that he can be aggressive, showed he can work on the inside, showed great defensive movement in making Baluta miss punches. So I think he showed a lot of good stuff. And then there's the things that he wanted to do that he didn't do, which was explode with the shots, put the combinations together. He was a little top heavy where he couldn't come back with the left hook. And we kept telling him, throw the left hook, and he would throw the right hand and leave it out there and then kind of get into a clinch or whatever instead of right hand, left hook. So, some of those things that, and he couldn't adjust to that. And I think he realizes that. So I think, you go back to the drawing board and fix what you thought were mistakes. And they come out better in the second time at 122.
100%. We'll get to Canelo, Billy Joe Saunders, and the ring issue in a second. But you brought I want people to maybe who don't necessarily know your theory on this. I remember from years in the gym of hearing you a lot of times say right hand, left hook. You're a big proponent of always or almost always following up with the left hook. And if I recall correctly, one of the teaching points was that first of all, your body's already in position to come back with the left hook when you're throwing the right hand, and it protects you more defensively throwing the left hook and just leaving yourself open from throwing the right hand. Am I kind of correct in this? And one of the reasons why you've taught it over the years?
It's a simple, yet as old as the hills. It's 150 years old that, against an orthodox fighter, you're an orthodox, you finish with the left hand. It could be a hook, could be a jab, but you finish with the left hand. And that neutralizes a lot of your opponent's counterattack abilities, puts you right back in your on guard position. You're right back in the position that you can defend. So I'm a big proponent of that, and I believe in it a lot. And it shouldn't be such a great secret to everybody, but it's key. It's a simple thing that trainers used to tell you all the time. Finish with your left hand. Finish with your left hand. Start with your left hand. Finish with your left hand. Like, it's basic boxing. And sometimes I think that fighters get away from that, and they forget that you can almost. I remember watching Rocky Mattioli fight, and he either dislocated his shoulder or broke his hand, and he fought like 10 rounds with one arm, and he's bam, boom, bam, bang, bam, 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 bam. And it was like, it was inspiring to watch. He couldn't use this arm, whether it was the shoulder or the arm, I don't remember. He couldn't use it, and he was fighting with one arm and staying in there. But it was the good arm to have. It was the left hand to have. And, so many great fighters made a living out of beating guys with one hand and usually the left hand. So
Lomachenko sorry, Russ, but I was going to say Lomachenko from the southpaw position, one fight had injured his left hand and was, I don't know if you remember this, he was almost only throwing the right hand, the right jab, and the right hook as well.
Right. So the lead hand is vital, but so important when it's orthodox against orthodox, or southpaw against southpaw. But it's so important that you use that. And yeah, I believe in that a lot. To me, it's boxing 101, and I think it makes a massive difference. Listen, Floyd Mayweather made a career out of baiting you to throw the right hand so that he can throw his right hand back at you. Canelo waits for you to throw the right hand and rips those uppercuts underneath. He has you reaching for it. Boom, he hits you with the uppercut. The counter off the right hand is one of the most deadly punches in boxing. So when you throw right hand, boom, and finish with the left, you take away that counter. So anyways, that's just something that I believe in. But all that said, Conlan, I think, wants to show that he can be a force at 22, and I think he needs to prove it to himself that he can offer up a better performance, and be solid at 122. Even though he did a lot of good things in that fight.
100%. And you talked about Canelo and the counter right uppercut that he likes to throw. We'll maybe see it, although this is a different style fight because he's fighting a southpaw in Billy Joe Saunders. And of course, that fight over the weekend coming up on, probably one of the bigger events this year, especially when you're going to look at a crowd of about 70,000 people they're expecting in Cowboy Stadium in the house that Jerry Jones built. And right now, Canelo is smart money to win by decision against Billy Joe Saunders, who's undefeated. And if you're interested in looking at some of the odds, though, for either a big upset in Billy Joe Saunders, or you think Canelo, as Eddie Reynoso and his camp have predicted, he's going to win by knockout, well, we have an offer for you. Be sure to check out, Mr. Anber, you want to say?
No, I want you to say, but I'm going to tell what the special is. I want to tell what the special is.
That's right. It's bet99.com. They're Canada's newest online sportsbook and casino. You can be sure to check out their player props, their bet builder, and their risk-free life bet bonuses. And if you use the code BOXING99, you get, Mr. Anber?
Yes, they will match your bet up to $600. So if you bet up to $600, they will double that for you. So it's just as if they gave you a free 600. So it's like you're betting 1,200 on the fight, and you'll capitalize on the return if you bet the underdog on 1,200.
That's right. It's a match of 100% up to $600. So if you even want to just wager a bit less, they'll match that. So up to $600, use the code BOXING99 on bet99.com. Now, the fight. Saunders and Canelo. Before we get to the stylistic matchup, what about the ring controversy that emerged all week? Billy Joe Saunders is somebody who does things differently. He doesn't really answer anyone. We know he's a bit of a loose cannon. Comes up and been kind of trashing Eddie Hearn because he thinks Eddie Hearn's been promoting Canelo more so than, his fellow British companion in Billy Joe Saunders. So they talked about the ring. Apparently they had an agreement for 20-foot ring inside the cables, and then the ropes, I should say. And then he wanted 22 foot, and now Canelo told Eddie Hearn, no problem. But at one point, it came to a position where Eddie Hearn wasn't really sure. He wanted to go back to Canelo and say, let's do a 22-foot ring, that Saunders and his father threatened to leave and say, we're out, and leave all those millions off the table. Crisis averted. But Russ, this is something interesting. We talked about this before in the past. Shouldn't the ring be something that's negotiated in the contract to avoid this issue? Or what examples have you had in your career of ring size situations?
When I first started in boxing, it would have been my first year in boxing. Actually, I'll tell you what, it was the first pro fight I ever worked. It was the first pro fight I ever worked. I'm working with Vinny Curto. We're on the undercard to Ali Perez against Eddie Mello at the main event at the Montreal Forum. This is when the weigh-in was the same day. So we're at the weigh-in, we weigh in, and of course they're setting up the ring and getting it ready for the night, because in 8 hours, the weigh-ins were at noon. In less than 8 hours, the place is full and there's a fight happening. So they're putting the ring up, and it was a gentleman named Jerry Patel who was putting up the ring. He was the ring guy in Montreal in those days. And he put up this phone booth for a ring. I mean, literally this tiny little, I don't even know if 16 feet inside the ropes was what it was. It was ridiculous. And Ali Perez said, I'm not fighting in that. He said, there's no way I'm fighting in that ring. And I remember that big controversy was up. So I always thought, okay, that's something to remember for the future. And they had to change the ring. Wow. But, for this one, Matthew, I'm just going to, like, with everything that's gone on, with all the disrespectful comments that have been said, with everything trying to build this up, I don't know if it's for the sake of publicity or whatnot. I think I just want to pass on this whole thing. Like, this is not, Matchroom didn't start promoting boxing, last week, right? This wasn't the first contract they signed. Billy Joe Saunders had 30 pro fights. He's undefeated. They've dealt with ring issues before. They didn't sign the biggest fight of their career, not having taken this into consideration. So I'm just going to say, I'm going to call a little BS on this one, that this was just all for hype, and, that there was never really a threat of anybody leaving, and that they might have tried to play games and said, no, we're fighting in an 18. No, we're not. just for script. I don't think that this was ever going to be something that was real. And I don't believe that, any fighter was going to leave if it wasn't a 22-foot ring or a 20-foot ring, whatever it is. So
one thing about Billy Joe Saunders is we know the mental warfare is something he enjoys doing, right? He really enjoys being the antagonist. When he fought David Lemieux here in Quebec, I remember speaking to Mark Ramsey after David loses the decision. He said one of the points they underestimated how much Billy Joe could kind of try to play those mind games into an opponent. And I don't know if you remember, at one point he avoids a shot from David. He looks at the sky, because, yeah. So he's a cocky guy, and he's backed it up for most of his career. Of course, he's undefeated, but this is a different type of test against the Canelo. And some people are afraid now that the ring issue, when he faced off against Canelo, he talks about Mexican beef because, of course, Canelo, who had tested positive in the past with clenbuterol, blaming it on Mexican meat, tainted steak that he had ate, and Saunders is throwing that back at him. People are afraid that Canelo may fall into the mind games of Billy Joe Saunders and maybe make a mistake or play into the fight that Saunders wants. Do you believe that, or do you think somebody of the class of Canelo is not going to be bothered by the trash talking of Billy Joe?
Well, I always wondered, does trash talking, just because you trash talk somebody, does that suddenly mean they can't fight anymore, or that they're going to fight worse? Or are you trash talking them and just making them even more mad that they're going to perform even better? So I don't know that there's any proof either way to that.
Well, it could be the game plan, right? It could be that you, instead of being more patient, you become more aggressive because you really want to hurt somebody because now personally you dislike the guy. No?
Maybe, or just, or makes you even sharper and better. Difficult to say. I'm not sure how each person reacts to that. I mean, the classic example is Ali against Liston in the first fight. He made Liston so crazy and didn't know what was going on that he owned him. Well, that's not the only blueprint that's ever been made, and it's been infallible since. There's been hundreds and hundreds of fights that has backfired. De
La Hoya Mayorga comes to mind, with Mayorga talking so much trash and disrespectful stuff, and De La Hoya, boom, convincing performance by.
Correct, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean just because you want to play mind games and get into somebody's head that's going to work. I don't know if I believe that. But that said, it is an interesting fight. Let's forget the personalities for a second. Let's forget the personas that they are. Let's forget the mind games. When the bell rings, it's going to be two quality opponents fighting each other. Billy Joe Saunders has run, hot and cold, if you will. He's undefeated, but he's had some mind-numbing performances, and he's had some ordinary performances, and I think the last fight was kind of ordinary, where he seemed disinterested in Mark Murray. So I guess it's going to depend on which Billy Joe Saunders shows up. Canelo has proven to have a slight problem, handicap, weakness, whatever you want to call it, against southpaws that can move. And I think Erislandy Lara is a perfect example of that. That's a blueprint on how to confuse and baffle and bother Canelo. Canelo has shown as well that he can be outboxed. He can be outmaneuvered on his feet. He can be bang. Even Amir Khan, although the judges had a ridiculous score of Canelo winning every round, Amir Khan was outboxing Canelo at times. So there is a certain blueprint to that. Kovalev had the jab in his face a lot. And he was kind of reserved, waited, bided his time until he was ready to go. That's one thing he seems to have judged very well. It's going to be interesting to see which Billy Joe Saunders shows up. Tyson Fury thinks that it's going to be a masterclass. If you listen to Tyson Fury talk, you think he was fighting, and that this is going to be the biggest surprise in boxing history. And Billy Joe, and I'll tell you what, I asked Roy what he thought, and he says Saunders has a good chance. So.
Right. I saw that also. He quoted in the boxing scene, Roy Jones thinking that Billy Joe really has a legitimate chance of pulling the upset because of the fact that I think especially now that the ring situation is to Saunders' advantage, we think the strategy, of course, is to make it a tough fight to score, a lot of movement, come in with a few shots to land against Canelo clean and get out of the way. I don't see how Saunders is going to fight Canelo on the inside. I'd be shocked if he does that.
He hasn't fought anybody on the inside. I don't see why he would do that. I think he has to use the southpaw stance is going to be massive for him, because things that Canelo would expect to land or expect to happen, or a movement to occur from a right-hander, is not going to happen from the southpaw. I think that's going to be key. The stance is going to be key. He can't do what Lara did, which was land a shot and then run, 3 steps away, as if you're getting. He's going to have to be more conservative in what he does in his movements and throw back. And when he hits him, he has to hit him again. When he bangs him, he has to bang him again. He can't bang and then move and run and run and run and run. And because the judges are going to make it look like he's running, and they're not going to score that. The crowd's going to boo. There's going to be a lot of outside influences on that. He has to use that to his advantage and keep up a high punch rate in order to frustrate Canelo. So the southpaw stance is the ticket on this one, I think.
The other thing I think fans should be on the lookout for this Saturday, and it was brought to my attention because of Andy Ruiz fighting Chris Arreola this past weekend with Eddie Reynoso in Andy Ruiz's corner. Eddie Reynoso also the coach of Canelo, and we saw it against Callum Smith when Canelo fought Callum Smith, is that Canelo is smart at finding body to hit. If he can't necessarily locate Saunders and hit him clean, he'll hit the arm, he'll hit the shoulder, hit parts of the body that, because of the power Canelo possesses, is still going to have an impact, and it's still going to bother a fighter and slow him down to eventually maybe landing that shot clean. He hit the bicep repeatedly of Callum Smith. Andy Ruiz started hitting Chris Arreola's arm when he noticed that the shoulder blade arm was bothering him on the left side at one point. It's part of strategy of boxing. If you can't necessarily hit the head clean, find a body part and land that shot. I think that's something to look into as well.
That's true, but I'm not sure. I think the majority of the defense that's going to come from Billy Joe Saunders is going to be similar to the Lara type defense. It's going to be movement, range, slipping, dipping. It's going to be out of range. It's not going to be standing there taking shots and firing back. Callum was ready to stand there, and he tucked up and was ready to take shots to fire back. And I don't think that's going to be Billy Joe's plan. I don't think that's, but he will at some point have to hit something to slow him down so that he can drive that power home. There's no doubt about it. He's the bigger puncher in there. He's the smaller guy, but he's the bigger puncher. And Billy Joe Saunders has that southpaw advantage and the defense that could make it a difficult night for Canelo. But it's going to be interesting to see after all of this, if Saunders is able, after all this talking, after everything that he said, of the way he's tried to get in his head, if this works and he pulls off this massive upset, it's going to be something we'll be talking about for a while, I think.
100%. 100%. Even if it's a close fight, Canelo hasn't been really in a close fight since Triple G rematch, I think. And it was Danny Jacobs before that or after? I think Danny Jacobs might have been before. Was his middleweight debut, which some rounds were close, but Canelo won. And he's more of a counter puncher, Canelo by nature. That's why I think people expect him to maybe win more of a decision than a knockout, especially considering Saunders has never been knocked out in his career. But I think no doubt that fight deserves all the spotlight, all the attention, especially when the crowd and people are going to see that massive of a crowd since the pandemic against Billy Joe Saunders. But we got to get to the final topical situation of the week, which is Mayweather and Logan Paul press conference, which of course this was planned to steal the spotlight from Canelo Alvarez, because Mayweather always does this. Like, he knows that he wants to show that he's still the cash cow of all of combat sports, and he wants to get all the mainstream attention to his event, his exhibition, whatever, against Logan Paul. And I'm not saying that it was arranged what happened afterwards, but having the press conference on the same week that Canelo was fighting, I think that for sure was planned. And then I believe it was planned from Jake Paul's involvement of trying to steal Mayweather's cap and be the antagonist, be the troll that he is professionally, even though he's not fighting Mayweather. It's Logan who's fighting Mayweather. Then a whole scene, chaos ensued. Some people think Mayweather was involved in the act and it was all just to sell pay-per-views. I don't buy it for a second. Mayweather legitimately seemed completely upset and ticked off. And look, it's going to generate pay-per-view buys because of it. I don't doubt it. And Jake Paul was very calculated in his move. But I don't know, Russ, where to begin with this circus-type atmosphere that is happening in boxing. The Paul brothers are really doing a great job of marketing themselves and getting attention. But I think it's unfortunate that this is taking the spotlight away from Canelo's fight on Saturday night.
You know, Matthew, it's sick that we're even talking about it. It's sick that we're even
Have to. I
discussing.
mean, some people would have probably liked that we started the podcast with that topic.
It makes me want to throw up. Like that's how, there's a lot of people Mayweather could probably help, instead of giving the limelight to these two unworthy guys, and generate.
You change your stance on them, because I remember at first you were saying, "Hey, listen, this might be good for boxing, and if everybody could be involved and make money with them, go ahead." Or you were kind of more
Not fighting Mayweather. I never said that about them fighting Mayweather.
No.
That they're doing that, like what they did with the basketball player, even though Nate Robinson should not have had a license, that they're doing that, fine. That I have no problem with. Fight somebody of your caliber, no problem. But don't pretend to be in boxing and pretend you're fighting Floyd Mayweather thinking this is a real fight, that this is not. Okay, this is all a staged performance. This is not real. You're not real fighters. You don't deserve to jump to the top of the heap and fight somebody like Mayweather. And Mayweather has allowed that to happen, and I don't know why he's allowed that to happen. Obviously, yeah. Okay, I take that back. Obviously, it's because of money. Could that money have been used better? Could there have been a better way of doing that? I don't know. Back in the day when Sugar Ray Robinson, he would go around to different countries, go to England, and fight the best guy there. Ali did the same thing. He went to different countries to fight the best guy in that country. That was, even though they knew he's going to win. Joe Louis had the famous Bum of the Month Club, where he'd fight a different guy in a different city. So I get that. But boy, something is starting to be even more wrong about this, that not only are you doing this with the Paul brothers in this circus act, but you're doing it to discredit somebody like Canelo on his weekend, and the network is behind it, fighting for that viewership. And for people who say boxing is dead, I'm baffled. Like it's crazy. How can boxing be dead when they're going at it? The competition is so fierce. It's so fierce. But that this is an exhibition. I don't believe this is an officially sanctioned fight. So if it's not an officially sanctioned fight, why are we getting all excited about it? Because we're calling it an exhibition, but really it's going to be a real fight. All of it just seems wrong. I'm just starting to believe that this is just all wrong, and I can't stomach it.
Well, it's not going to be the hardcore boxing fan who are really into this event. I think it's some of people who are boxing fans are going to really want to tune in, probably to see Logan Paul get knocked out, and then we can move on from that storyline. And some who've disliked Mayweather for years might even wish that Mayweather somehow gets upset and gets this shocking loss, which is not. If the fight is fought with regular boxing rules, folks, 0.0% chances that Mayweather loses this bout. Especially if he's legitimately ticked off by what happened today, he will do what it takes to embarrass Logan Paul, not only just coast like he maybe have done. Some people accuse Mayweather of allowing McGregor, to go through these rounds at one point, but I think he'll try to finish the show in emphatic fashion, a little bit like when Mayweather got upset at Victor Ortiz in that fight. Boom. I think it would be similar result for Logan Paul. And then whatever happens to Jake Paul, who knows? I just do think, of course, the attention and spotlight is deserved to Canelo, is deserved to fighters who are going up the ranks and trying to get the attention the right way.
How many rounds are they fighting?
I don't even know if that's been 100% determined. The weight, the rounds. We would have to maybe get Mike Coppinger, Dan Rayfield on the podcast soon. At one point, they'll know a bit more about this. What I've read is that they're still deciding the bout for the rounds, and I think it's supposed to be 10 rounds. But don't quote me on this. Anyway, it won't last a distance. I don't believe so.
The thing is, I just don't see in any way how Mayweather emerges out of this as he has everything to lose and nothing to gain. Like, if he doesn't blast out, like Logan Paul lost us, I believe, a split decision to KSI, right?
Yeah.
That's his only loss on his record. And I think he went the 4 rounds, I think it was a 4-rounder.
No wins in his career. That's right.
No wins, and he lost a 4-round decision. if he in any way has to go number of rounds, I mean, there's no way he's carrying this guy. This guy will collapse by himself after 4 rounds in the ring with a Mayweather. You know, it has to be a decisive beating for, and then people are good, even if it is, I should say, even if it is a decisive beating, people are going to say, well, what do you expect? This guy, he's only had one pro fight. You know, what do you expect against Mayweather? You know, like he's in a no-win situation.
Yeah, but there's some people will be happy to see Logan Paul get his ass kicked, and I can't really blame them. That's going to be the turnout. And but it's not really for the boxing hardcore fans. So I'm going to get into a topic to end the evening from. I talked about it a little bit earlier on. Ron Evans, who tweeted us a quick question on the pound for pound list, because this is something some people believe Mayweather is the greatest of all time, right? He self-proclaims himself to be TBE, the best ever. But when you look at the top 10 fighters pound for pound, the question from Ron Evans was regarding Roberto Duran and whether or not you, Russ, thought he belonged within the 10 best fighters in the history of boxing. And you said yes. But I thought that was interesting because when you look at Duran, Leonard, Hearns, and Hagler, Duran did not beat all of these fighters. And many people rank Duran ahead of all the other three when it comes to the top 10 pound for pound. So is that the case with you as well? Or do you think Sugar Ray Leonard is ahead of Duran in the top 10 pound for pound list?
No, I don't think Ray is. I think Duran definitely is. As a matter of fact, I'm not sure if I'm far off from having Duran very close to the top 5 on the pound for the all-time pound for pound list.
And he is on most people's list. So maybe explain as sometimes why that's a foreign concept. How can Duran, who lost to Leonard in the rematch convincingly, be ahead of him in the pound for pound rankings because of the lightweight? And I think it's the body of work that people have to factor in, right?
Don't please, let's not just use the rematch, because you use the rematch that he lost, which you know, that was again part of a strategic plan to get him back in the ring as soon as possible, knowing he wasn't in shape, knowing he wasn't ready, knowing he had just pulled off one of the biggest upsets and biggest wins of his career by beating Leonard here in Montreal, you know, at Olympic Stadium in 15 rounds, you know, solid performance. Like he came and fought, moving up from lightweight, skipped right over the junior welterweight division, went right to welterweight, beat Carlos Palomino, then fights Leonard. You know, like this guy's on a tear, and he really won. To me, that second fight with Leonard, you know, was obviously a great performance by Leonard, but against a shell of a Duran who 6 months earlier was partying, less than 6 months earlier, won the fight. And, you know, it was in June, they fought in November. It was 5 months, you know, for him to, they knew he was out of shape. They knew he was partying. They knew he was fat. He wasn't hungry yet. He wasn't ready to be back in the ring to fight Leonard again. And Leonard was, you know, and credit to Leonard for that, but he wasn't ready. So don't just use that fight, because after that debacle, which he says, no mas, you know, he comes back and beats Davey Moore in dominating fashion in a massive comeback to win the junior middleweight title. Then years later moves up and becomes middleweight champion, beating Iran Barkley, you know. So this is a guy who went from 135 to 160 and became world champion along the way. So against legitimate guys in big weight classes. So, you know, everything he did, everything, the way he fought, the way his style, the science of a Roberto Duran in the ring, you know, unquestionably makes him one of the greatest fighters in boxing history and one of the most complete fighters in boxing history. So in answer to, you said Ron Evans, but I knew him when he was Ronnie Evans. So in answer to Ronnie's question, yes, I put him in there, and I've got him quite high. So if I have to think of pound for pound guys, I'm thinking
Sugar Ray Robinson is one.
Sugar Ray Robinson, number one. In no particular order after that, you've got Willie Pep, you've got Archie Moore.
Archie Moore, that in the top 10 definitively. Henry Armstrong before Archie Moore, no?
Henry Armstrong, good one. Henry Armstrong. Willie Pep was fantastic.
Joe Louis and Ali are the two best heavyweights.
But you're talking heavyweights. We're talking pound for pound, right?
I know, but I'm saying they were the two best heavyweights who belong in the top 10 pound for pound of all time. Do they not?
Yes. You would put them there. So, you know, I think Duran is not far behind in that. You know, I think he's very close to being right there. You know, so
how about a guy like? Do you? What about the theory that is Jack Johnson? Was that such a long time ago that maybe now it's too tough to gauge, because many people in the history of boxing put him still in the top 10 pound for pound as well?
I'm not sure again about pound for pound. Like there's a lot of great, you have to remember how you identify pound for pound. It's the ability to do, that's why I'm not sure about putting Lewis or Ali in the pound for pound list because
Because originally,
over
the argument was pound for pound was not for heavyweights, right? It's for everybody else outside of the heavyweights.
right. And it's supposed to be on what you can do globally as a fighter, you know, everything, every ability you have, power, speed, defense, aggressiveness, ring generalship, footwork, everything that makes you such a complete fighter, which is what Sugar Ray Robinson was, such a complete fighter,
I
all
think
around
Ali
fighter.
also was though, Russ. I mean, I really think Ali and Joe Louis qualified then.
I'm not sure that I agree with that. I'm going to reserve judgment on that right now because I don't want to say anything off the top of my head. But I'm not sure that I agree with that. You know, I mean, if you wanted me to start to pick out flaws as to why they should not be considered in that, you know, Lewis was very flat-footed and had trouble with movers. You know, if you moved on him, he was a big problem. Ali, you know, was never threw a. I don't know if he threw a body punch. I don't know if there's actually existence of him throwing a body punch. You know, it was everything Ali threw was the 1, 2, 3, hook, hook, hook. You know, that was what he threw. He was not an inside fighter. You know, he'd grab and clinch on the inside. He wasn't an inside fighter. So there's a lot of things that might not say that you're pound for pound, okay? Because pound for pound means you're a fighting machine. And would Ali's style or would Lewis's style have been successful at welterweight or at middleweight? You know, that's kind of the question. You have to reverse the question. Whereas if you took Sugar Ray Robinson's style and put him into a 200-pound, 220-pound body, and he could do what he did at middleweight and at welterweight, oh my God, forget about it. You know, he'd be champion for as long as he wanted to be. So you have to be careful how you identify that pound for pound saying. So, but Duran, for the amount of fights that he had in this modern era, having over 100 pro fights, being world champion at 35, being world champion at 54, being world champion at 47, being world champion at 60. Look, I mean, it just incredible what he did as a fighter. I say he was world champion at 54. I'm not sure if the Davey Moore fight was for the title. So you have to check that for me. But, you know, nonetheless, I mean, he went up and beat Barkley for the title. And, you know, I mean, this is incredible. You know, this is incredible stuff from a guy who was able to do everything. Jab you from the outside, rip you with body shots on the inside, slip punches standing right in front of you. I mean, let's face it, the only guy that ever got him, the only guy that ever nailed him was Tommy Hearns. That's the only one. That's the only guy that got him.
Probably, you know, when you look at the four kings and the Hagler, Hearns, Leonard, and Duran, when you look at the top 10 pound, well, not top 10, but just overall pound for pound, Hearns maybe falls below Hagler, or maybe he's ahead of Hagler. It's close.
No, of course, Hearns can't fall below Hagler. He got knocked out in 3 rounds by him, you know, so you can't put him below him. But you know, Hagler, Duran took Hagler 15 rounds, and like it was Marvin was in the fight of his life against Duran.
I know, that's what I'm saying. It's style make fights. That's the you know, the expression that's been around forever. And he did win the title against Davey Moore, the WBA title, back when the WBA only gave 1 title per division and not 3 to 4 as they do now. So final thoughts to Mr. Anber on this evening. I hope eventually we'll have Scully and have other people involved. I think it's the pound for pound history of boxing debate is always interesting to talk about. Any final thoughts this evening as you enjoy your few days left of quarantine?
Listen, I'm my mind and my body is all messed up thinking about what I just saw today, you know, being released with Logan Paul and Jake Paul and Mayweather and that stuff in it. The quote that we were talking about before we started recording was Adam Catterall, who said, I'll let you say the quote, but something about being the highest
clowns. If you play with clowns, expect a circus.
Yeah. And, you know, he said the highest paid fighter in boxing history, the best fighter of our generation, undefeated 50-0, you know, is chasing around a 24-year-old boy who took his hat. You know, like it really is. When you look at it in that context, it is a little sickening that that's going on. And I know it's money and, you know, the money that's going to be generated.
And look, there's a market for it because the kids and the younger generation and the non necessarily day-to-day boxing fans are going to say, oh, again, here's the purists who are complaining. They have no fun. They can't enjoy anything. Lighten up. This is entertainment. It's finally bringing fans to a sport that nobody cares about anymore. That's the
But
argument I
it's
hear all the
not.
time on social media.
But it's not. It doesn't bring fans to the sport. They don't care about the sport. It's a mugging. It's like what you said to me, how people who love to watch hockey fights don't watch boxing, but they'd love to see two guys on skates pounding the heck out of each other. It
Right.
doesn't make sense. And I think the same thing that can be said of the fan base that represents boxing and MMA is of two different worlds. It's not the same type
You
of
have some
fan base.
crossover. You have some crossover more and more, I believe. But the Mayweather-McGregor fight kind of launched all of this. I think where I'm not sure if this is going to be a phase or if this is here to stay. I'm still torn about that. I'm still not, like when the Paul brothers lose and the kind of mystique goes away, are we going to have more of these circus events with the prospect of boxing or MMA being involved, or are we going to move on and get back to the way things were? I'm not sure if this is like a pandemic type craziness stuff happening, or if this is something that going forward is just going to invade the sport. I'm not sure.
Me either, brother. I don't know. I don't know what to think anymore. It's gone cuckoo. It's literally gone cuckoo. The things I'm seeing, the lack of respect from people, like it's dehumanizing. When you see the words that are spoken to people and on social media, even Areola, what he said on air, after the fight, the decision, which other, oh, that's funny. But like at the end of the day, this is a man's frustrations coming out. But it didn't, even though he's frustrated, it didn't matter what anyone else thought of or what anyone else cared about that was listening. That didn't matter. All that mattered was what he wanted to say. And I think that that's a problem. That's humanity. We're losing humanity. We're losing touch of humanity. Can you find me any clips of Muhammad Ali using the language that we hear today with people trash
No,
talking?
no, but Ali was not looked on, especially when he was, think about the Sonny Liston fight. Think about when he was coming up. He was not looked upon at all by the older generation than he was in a good light. They didn't. They just at the time he was kind of the what we're like. It's different generations, but they thought he was extremely outspoken, lack of respect. Think about it. Being accused of being a draft dodger. So in history, look at it, looks at it differently now. We say he was really somebody who was a big talker, but there was intelligence behind his, his ways. And I think that's what's lacking now. It's not about being intelligent, and what a lot of these fighters or these, in the case of the Paul brothers, they're just trying to be trolls and they're just trying to get, people to like them on Instagram. That's all it's about.
Matthew, the big difference with Ali is all the hatred that came towards Ali, was reflective of society at that time. You're talking about an era when there was still washrooms and water fountains that were reserved for whites only.
Okay, but they were also there when Joe Louis was heavyweight champion of the world, and Joe Louis was very well liked by the media.
And they needed a Joe Louis at the time because he was the first black heavyweight champion since Jack Johnson, because Jack Johnson talked and they said, never again. No black guy's ever going to fight for the title again. So they said, okay, if Lou is going to fight for the title, he has to be quiet and he has to, toe the mark and, just do his same thing when Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in baseball. So we needed those kind of guys to break the barrier, to open up the door for somebody like Ali. But Ali became reflective of an era. What he did was not just for him. It was for a lot of people who protested the war. He used the position that he was in to be its most vocal supporter of the anti-war movement, if you will. So, there was more political than just sports. Please don't even mention in the same breath, the garbage that we're hearing being spewed over the last few days on both fights. The Canelo fight with Saunders and Jake Paul, the garbage that's being spewed, the foulness that's being spewed, has nothing to do with the betterment of the world. This is not on a cause or on the same plane as what Muhammad Ali was on. This is not even the same. This is just a total lack of respect for anybody, that you just disregard anything. You don't care. You have no respect for it. Because if you were that kind of a person, you couldn't do what they're doing. You couldn't do it. It's impossible to be that respectful and good and nice and then turn around and be that low. It's not possible. So I don't even know what to think anymore, Matt. I'm
Well,
just
with that, I think your tease finish. It's been a while. We had a good chat. It was a bit over an hour. We busted again the scheduled time. We're a little bit like the airlines. The estimated time of departure, and 90% of the time it's not leaving when at the time it says it's going to be leaving. It's kind of the same thing for a podcast. So the estimated time of length is always on the over. If you were on bet99.com, the odds would be very good to bet the over on the time the show is supposed to last.
correct, correct. Well, listen, let's see what the fans have to say that are listening, the people have to say, but I'm just like at a loss for words to just express, like, I'm trying to verbalize what my gut is telling me, and I'm trying to find the rationale in my brain to explain that something stinks in the state of Denmark. Something's not right, and I just don't like it. I don't like what I'm seeing. When you look at the performances of a Katie Taylor and a Natasha Jonas, when you look at the way Canelo, conducts himself and is offering these opportunities for these guys to make big money and not be entitled to the respect. This guy has a resume on him. You can say what you want about his positive test, etc. Something just seems wrong about the lack of respect. And the calling everybody out with no regard, swearing at them, mother effer this, I don't know where we're going. I really don't know where we're going.
Well, we're going to be going to bed, Russ. It's another evening to cap off here. Thank you again for tuning in to another edition of Calling Russ Anber. Always be sure to leave us comments, questions, whatever you like. We appreciate the feedback. And Mr. Anber, I'll wish you a good evening.
And to you as well. And I look forward to hearing what the people have to say about this, because I know that there's a lot of opinions out there about this.
100%. Take care, everyone.
Have a good one, brother.